Welcome to the Hip Replacement Podcast, where recovery meets motivation and healing leads to a whole new lifestyle. I'm Chris Bystriansky, your host. I'm an author, athlete, and double hip replacement patient. I've been through the surgeries, the setbacks, and the comebacks, and I'm here to help you do the same. Each week, I'll bring you tips, tools, expert advice, and inspiring stories to help you take back your life, one step at a time. Thanks for joining the Hip Replacement Podcast. New hips, new you, let's go. Welcome to the Hip Replacement Podcast. I'm very excited. This is the first episode. This is the inaugural episode of this podcast. And I'm so excited because I've always wanted to share my experiences going through the hip replacements. And this is a great opportunity. And I'll get into more of that later. But I am Chris Bystriansky. I am your host. I'm a two-time hip replacement patient. I had both of my hips done more than 10 years ago. One's about 12 years, and the other one's a little over 10. So I have a little bit of experience here, and I've always loved talking about the hip replacements after I had them done and after things started to turn around for me. It was a pretty negative experience, I thought, initially, and then it turned into something very positive in my life. So after two hip replacement surgeries, I've gone on to live a pretty normal life, from my perspective. But I think what I've been able to do is live a more exciting life because of my hip replacement surgeries. Let me give you an example. I've done a couple Ironman triathlons. I've done a couple 29 Everesting events, and I would not have done those but for the hip replacement surgeries, because I wanted to prove to myself I just wanted to feel normal. And I want to share those experiences. So I'm launching this podcast to share those things with you, because I think it's important for people who have gone through this experience. It may seem very traumatic and terrible at the time, but there definitely is a light at the end of the tunnel. So it can be very positive, and it has been for me. And one of the things that I just want to say is that thank you for being here, and thanks for the opportunity to share my stories. I love getting the word out, and I hope these stories and this podcast brings a little sunshine or a little happiness to your life, or puts you in a better mood, or inspires you to go on and do things that you didn't know you could do in the first place. So it was just great to hit some milestones as I was going through the recovery process. So who is this podcast for? This podcast is for anyone who's facing a hip replacement surgery, recently had a surgery, or is even years down the road after having surgery. And furthermore, it's for any family member or friend of somebody who had the surgery, or this has impacted their life, because my wife really was by my side the whole way. And I would love to share, what she was going through as I was going through the surgeries and the recoveries even years later. I'm sure she has a great perspective, and I'll bring her on. So what are we going to talk about in this podcast? What are the topics? The title, the Hip Replacement Podcast. Whatever way you want to look at it, this could be a very broad topic or a very narrow topic. And from my perspective, I want to talk about on this podcast anything related to a hip replacement surgery. So that could be anything including recovery, sleeping, dealing with aches and pains, stretches or exercises, maybe some biohacks to help you feel better. I do a couple things, and I'll share those in different episodes. But I do things now, even 10, 12 years after surgery that helped me, because I still have aches and pains come up. And even though I'm a relatively young guy still, I had my first surgery when I was in my 30s. So, I still have aches and pains come up, but there's certain things that I do that I've learned to do that help me. And I could share those with you, and hopefully you'll get some benefit, and, you could live your life a little more normally, I guess you'd say, or a little more excitingly. I don't know how you say that. But anyway, anything related to a hip replacement surgery is fair game. And also, I want to hear from you. We'll bring on guests. I want to hear your stories. I want to hear your successes, your challenges, what you've done to overcome, what challenges you still face, how this may have helped you, and hear more about your mindset. So, we'll bring some people on, and we'll have a discussion and really open up what people are going through or have gone through regarding a hip replacement surgery, because I find it fascinating the way people deal with these kinds of things, these kind of life events, and how meaningful they are to really change the course of one's life, maybe for the worse, maybe for the better. Maybe people walk out with a better that's funny. Maybe people have a different view later on in life. It certainly happened to me. I wanted to go do more exciting things after my surgery once I recovered than frankly I wanted to do before. I was pretty comfortable before my surgery and my lifestyle, and having the surgeries was really a kick in the pants that I needed to go and really explore what I was capable of. So, doing endurance events is something that somebody with a hip replacement surgery generally does not do, but I found that pretty appealing. So we'll talk about anything and everything related to a hip replacement surgery. The length, I'm going to try to keep these under 30 minutes because I know you have other things to do, and I certainly have other things to do, and let's get right to the meat. Let's talk about what we need to talk about, and let's move on. All right, let's go apply some of the things that we may learn on the podcast. Let's go apply, make our lives better, and come back the next week for another episode. And as far as the frequency, I think once a week is about appropriate. I feel a lot of times when I listen to other podcasts, if there's too much content, they come out too often, I just cannot keep up with them. So I figure about once a week is a good frequency to release these. But we'll talk about a lot of different things. There's a lot of things I want to share about the surgery and the recoveries. When I was about 2 years out from my surgeries, I started to participate in these orientations at the big hospital system in Houston where I had my surgeries. And they would have orientation once a month for new patients. And I sat in those orientation sessions. They were a couple hours long, 2-3 hours long. And they would have guest speakers come in. I sat in there as a patient twice, once before each of my surgeries. And as I was sitting there, I remember thinking it would be great if I had a good recovery and I could come back and be a speaker, like a testimonial type person. Well, sure enough, years later, I volunteered to do that. And I would always be last. I did it every month for about a year at the hospital before schedules changed and I could no longer make it. But I did it every month for about a year. And I would talk last. They would have me on a schedule for about 15 minutes. And I always ended up talking about 30 minutes or longer, and the conversation would spill out into the hallway because we would lose the big conference room. And there was about between 10 and 20, 25 patients every time, every month. There was all these patients sitting there in the room asking questions from the nurses, from the surgeons, from the anesthesiologists, from the caseworkers at the hospital who would come in one by one. And I got to tell you that I really enjoyed that experience because I got to use my experience or the lessons that I learned, my successes with other people who were absolutely terrified of going through the process like I was years earlier. And it was just comforting to be able to give back and let these people know that there was life after a hip replacement surgery. So I enjoy talking about that and answering their questions. And I know I'm going to enjoy this podcast. I've been wanting to do this for a while, but now it's just time. And I hope you find these to be informative, educational, helpful in any way, entertaining, funny. They give you an uplift, maybe give you some ideas to help with your recovery, whether you're, a day past surgery or 5 years past surgery. I've gone through a lot. I've learned a lot. There have been a lot of aches and pains creep up, and the way I deal with them, you may find helpful too. So I'm happy to roll out that information. And I'm just grateful to be here. And I want to thank you for showing up for this inaugural episode of the podcast, of the hip replacement podcast. We'll get into details in further episodes, but just very happy to be here. And I just want to say thank you. And if you have not already done so, I have put together a list of the top 12 tips for hip replacement patients. There's the link in the show notes below. So if you just click on the link, you'll be able to download my top 12 tips for hip replacement patients. And also, please subscribe to the podcast, and so you don't lose any episodes. And leave a review. That'd be very helpful. And spread the word if you can. The more people that participate, the better guests we'll have, the better stories we'll have to share. So I can certainly share my information, but I think eventually you're going to get sick and tired of me, and I may run out of things to say. So we'll get some guests in here to really beef up the podcast, and I'd like to learn too from other folks. So I'm looking forward to that. But anyway, that's it for this inaugural episode. Short and sweet, and look for another episode coming up next week. I'm going to share how I knew and when I knew I was turning a corner in my recovery. So for a long time, months and months and months after surgery, I didn't know if I'd ever get back. I didn't know if I'd ever feel normal again. But there was a point several months after my surgeries where I knew I would have a much better outcome than I expected or that I could have hoped for. My original goal was just to be able to play with my kids, get on the floor and play with my kids, my young kids, and help my wife. And my outcome surpassed all of that. But this is the point that I knew I would have a better outcome than I could possibly expect. And I'll talk about that in the next episode, because maybe you have had a similar epiphany or something happen to you, or maybe you could set something like this and look for it to really give you the vision for the future. So anyway, that's it. You go and have a great rest of your day. I look forward to sharing everything that I possibly can with you. And until next time, I wish all the best in life to you. Take care. Thank you so much for coming to the Hip Replacement Podcast. Take care.